You mentioned Iran, and I wanted to talk about Iran
Yeah.
because I was a political science student. I took classes on U.S. foreign policy, international relations in the Middle East. Obviously, Iran is a hot topic. You've been to Iran 3 times, and not only have you opposed war with Iran and advocated for us to rejoin the nuclear deal, you've also criticized the economic sanctions on Iran. So I'm wondering, can you talk a bit about your experience traveling to Iran and explain your critique of economic sanctions?
As I said, based on my belief um, that war is a crime against humanity,
Mm,
and when I see my country threatening another country, whether it's Russia or whether it's Iran or whether it's Cuba or Nicaragua or wherever else, I can appeal to our government to, resolve these conflicts peacefully.
mm,
But I think something that I can do personally is to get to know the people
mm,
in Russia or Iran or China or wherever else it is. And I, I mean, most people don't even know the name of one person
mm,
in Iran, aside of whoever the terrible leader of this country is. Uh, and try to build peace from the bottom up.
mm,
I mean, I think Eisenhower once said that he says, "I'd like to believe that former President Eisenhower, I'd like to believe that the people of the world want peace so much that governments will have to get out of the way and let them have it."
mm,
Well, I think citizen diplomacy, beginning to, to get to know each other and try to understand each other,
mm,
and to see each other, see that on both sides we're kind of fed lies.
mm,
And I mean, I think if the people of the world, if it was up to us, I think what's the point in having war with each other? We're the ones who are going to suffer.
mm,
So going to Iran was the people were very friendly,
mm,
very hospitable, and interested in getting to know Americans, and welcomed us into their homes. And um, I can remember one man I met who said essentially, why can't all of us practice our religious beliefs? Which is basically, we love one another. And another said, oh, welcome to Iran. We would like many, many people to come from the United States, but don't bring their guns. Um, but in this last trip, we actually met with the foreign minister
mm,
of Iran, who had, on behalf of Iran, had negotiated the nuclear deal
mm,
between the United States and Iran, and he gave us, American people about an hour and a half of his time, and I think it is so important that we just be able to put ourselves in the other guy's shoes,
mm,
the other person's shoes. And here, and we say Iran is a threat to our interests.
mm,
Well, we have many, many, many military bases surrounding Iran,
mm,
and we've been fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan,
mm,
right on their borders, and we have, you know, we have uh, military ships right off the coast of Iran. And we say they're a threat to our interests. Well, I mean, what the heck are our interests? I don't
mm,
know. So, and we met Iranian people that care very deeply about peace.
Mhm.
Some of them that we met actually had bicycled all the way from Tehran to San Francisco, going by boat in between, over the water. But just from their end, let's get to know each other
Mhm.
and step away from this madness. Well, we also learned that in Iran, there's been a, whatever they call it, the religious edict from the top Iranian leader that nuclear weapons are immoral and are against the way of God, the way of Allah. I think the assumption in the United States is, from the point of view of the government, is Iran is trying to get nuclear weapons, and we're going to have to stop them because they're bad people. So of course they should have nuclear weapons. The U.S., when the Shah of Iran was head of Iran, we started them on the path of, we got nuclear power plants that could enrich uranium, etc. And that was fine because it was kind of our guy in charge. But President Biden, when he was running for president, said we're going to return to the nuclear deal. And this was not just between Iran and the United States. It was many European countries. And I think Russia also was a part of that, but which Trump just abruptly, withdrew from that. Well, Biden said that he was going to renew that. But now he's been president for whatever it is. It's 11 months.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened. And we had a very liberal president, that was ready to sign on a moment's notice if the U.S. stopped the economic sanctions, etc. But I think the military-industrial complex in this country is way too powerful. Our democracy is being corrupted by money. I think the politicians listen to, the people that make contributions, which is very often the military contractors and all those folks, rather than the people. But we're on the verge of nuclear war with both China and Russia today. And this is so dangerous. And as Daniel Ellsberg has pointed out, if we have even a small nuclear war, getting the debris and quote small, I don't know what small could be in terms of nuclear war, but all the debris in the air, the sun will not be able to get through. And within 9 months or so, millions of people, hundreds of millions of people will probably have been killed by the bombs. But then the rest of us will starve to death. So we are really threatening to put an end to human life on our planet because we don't like the Russians, or we don't like the Chinese or the Iranians. And this is so insane. And I think if the American people really realize this, if the people of the world understood this, we'd all be out of the streets in as sustained, powerful way as the people in the environmental movement would be. But we have somehow bought into this lie that having nuclear weapons and being ready to use them against the enemy is a way to get security. And saying that whatever security means, if it means everybody might end up being dead, our allegiance to security through nuclear weapons and military bases all over the world is so strong and so deep that if that's more important than money for education for our kids, food for hungry people in this country, or healthcare. I mean, you would think that this pandemic should have awoken us to. There are other ways that are much more important to the people in terms of what security means. I mean, to have your kids die of either hunger or suffer from lack of a decent education, or to have young people mortgage their lives to pay back student loans. I mean, we'd have tons of money for all of this. And I think it's 3 or 4% of our military budget could end world hunger all over the world. Well, I think then we'd be really secure. What country would want to bomb us if we're ending starvation all over the world? So anyway, you're getting some of my propaganda too, I guess. I don't consider it propaganda. I think it's life experience.
As you've talked about, you've been consistently anti-war. You've been a critic of US imperialism. President Biden recently officially ended the war in Afghanistan, withdrawing US troops, and of course faced really fierce backlash from the media, from the foreign policy establishment. But I think in American politics recently, there's been this talk of ending endless wars, ending the forever war, in the instance of Afghanistan. So there seems to be this sort of anti-war current in American politics. So I'm wondering, does that give you hope, and are you feeling optimistic about the end of US empire and what could come after the end of that?
I'll answer that, but I just realized I did not answer your question about the economic sanctions.
Oh, yeah.
I think economic sanctions are another form of warfare. And it's not the government leaders that are suffering, it's the people. And in a place like Iran, they can't even get the vaccines or the medicines to confront this COVID epidemic. That's, I think, same in Cuba and other places. I had a heart attack in Iran, and my insurance company could not even get money, could not send money to Iran to get me medical care. I mean, that I could, to pay the hospital because of the economic sanctions. But that has happened. I mean, I met families of people whose family members had died because they couldn't get medicines. And it's inflicting horrendous pain on people in Iran, in Russia, in Venezuela, in Cuba. And I don't think there's a deep understanding in the American people that it's the common people that we are inflicting suffering on. It's not the government leaders that are the people that our government sees as the problem, and it's a tragic way of, I mean, just as threatening nuclear weapons is the tragic way of trying to resolve conflict. Now your most recent question.
Considering like the recent withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan and sort of talk of ending endless wars and ending the forever war, and this like current of anti-war sentiment in American politics, are you feeling optimistic about the end of US imperialism?
Well, Johann Galtung said several years ago, he says, the American empire will end by 2000. 20, 25, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And just like all empires have ended.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you look at every empire in history, they have eventually ended, overextended themselves. And I think the same thing is happening with the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we're the most powerful nation in the world. And, fighting wars in Korea, in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and Syria, and and essentially we lose one war after another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, in my mind, the choice is: are the American people going to join the world's people in making this transition from an American empire to the United States living at peace with the rest of the world? Are we going to work to make this transition as peaceful as possible? Or are we going to keep fighting wars to inflict our vision of the world and continue our empire? Or are we going to do this through fighting wars one after another, or many at the same time, and are threatened wars with China and Russia at the present time? I've just read something in the last day or so. Both Russia and China are saying we want to see a multipolar world, where many of us are building our world leaders, and the United States is saying no. We are the dominant. We are the superpower, and don't dare to challenge that. And a multipolar world where we do respect one another, where we agree to resolve our conflicts peacefully, as we have said we do for the United Nations, or whether, our spending half of our discretionary budget every year on the military and our nuclear weapons and military bases all over the world, and developing new super bombers and modernizing our nuclear weapons. That is all in pursuit to make sure that American empire continues. Well, I think we're digging our own grave. And as I said earlier, I think spending that money to improve the lives of the American people who are suffering, helping end hunger and poverty and injustice all over the world, not through our bombers or our military troops or special forces, but through thousands and thousands of Peace Corps people helping, set up schools and medical centers. And that would be giving up the idea of empire, but buying into the idea that we're all one human family. And the United States is a country that loves people and respects people all over the world, pursuing their own religious beliefs, developing better quality of life for their own people, etc. That doesn't need to be a threat to us. We've seen millions of people in the street after the February 15th of 2003, where there were between 15 and 20 million people demonstrating all around the world. That was a beautiful, beautiful, powerful action. But unfortunately, and then we all, went back to business as usual. And what we've discovered through the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the farm workers movement, the, the civil rights movement, did I say that? Was you need sustained struggle.
Mm.
And if those 15 to 20 million people had said, there's no business as usual until we stop the US threat to start bombing and attacking Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
We could have stopped it. And we could stop the madness, you know, that we have now in World Beyond War,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm happy to say I was one of the people that started, but there's people all over the world that are trying to voice that belief that Eisenhower said, that he'd like to believe that the people of the world want peace so much that governments have to get out of the way and let them have it. Mm-hmm. Well, we need to realize that we've got the power mm-hmm. to strive that, to stop this madness. Mm-hmm. We have to be inspired by the powerful nonviolent movements that have overthrown dictatorships and governments that are not representing the people. And let's get governments that are going to represent the people and say, let's have peace. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of hope in the Poor People's Campaign mm-hmm. that is bringing together poor people in this country, people in the peace movement, the environmental movement, the women's movement, people challenging racism. I mean, as long as we stay focused on our one immediate concern, each of our groups will continue losing the battles. Mm. But if we realize that together we're the massive majority of the people of this country and of the world, that I think we can make the government listen to us if we join forces. Things like the Poor People's Campaign give me a lot of hope. And one of the people I took to Russia, a young woman, back in 1962, a long time ago, she said, "I'm an optimist because I can't afford to be a pessimist." Mm. And if we become pessimistic that there's no possibility for change, there will never be any change. Mm. If the students all over the South in 1960 had said, "Oh, there's been segregation forever," why should we try to stop this? But anyway, that's not the road. That would have been a ridiculous choice. Mm. And it's a ridiculous choice now to just sit back and say, well, that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. Let's see the world go up in smoke. I think if people give up hope, governments can do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to make the right decisions if we give up hope. And I think Jesse Jackson's encouragement to all of us to keep hope alive is great advice. Mm-hmm. And John Lewis's suggestion that we need to get out there and make good trouble is good advice for all of us.
A great place to end. Mr. Hartsough, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for I like your spirit, and I know you're going to make an important part in helping make this transition to a more livable world.
If you think these conversations are important and would like to see them continue, please consider supporting NVI and the work we do by subscribing to this YouTube channel, following us on Twitter and Facebook, and visiting our website. Also, please consider donating to our organization. Every little bit counts to help build a more just and nonviolent world.